And that's why in many systems of thinking the world is conceptualized as a battle between good and evil, and it's an appropriate conceptualization. It's a meta conceptualization, and the culture is the wise king and the tyrant, and that's always the case, and you're always stuck with that, because as an individual with your negative side and your positive side, your negative side is the resentful side that is irritated at the limited conditions of being and the suffering that entails, and its arbitrary and unfair nature. And no wonder, like, that side has a case to make. It's not trivial. In the Brothers Karamazov, that argument is laid out beautifully. There's a character, Alyosha, who's a monk, monastery novitiate, and not really a sparkling intellect, but a very good person. And he has a brother, Ivan, and Ivan's a vicious genius. And Ivan just takes Alyosha apart, and partly he does that by telling a story about, that Dostoevsky took this from a news story. The news story was that this mother and father had taken their young daughter and locked her in the outhouse overnight when it was like 30 below, and you know, she stayed out there crying and screaming and froze to death. And Ivan basically said to Alyosha, you know, a world in which that could happen should not be. It's a good argument, you know, and you can multiply that by millions of examples. So the part of us that is opposed to being and resentful, it's got a point, man. The problem, as far as I can tell, is that if you act that out, then it makes what you're objecting to worse. Now, you might be happy about that, and you might think, well, people couldn't be consciously pursuing that, but yes, they can. I would recommend a book called Panzram if you're interested in that sort of thing. It's a book written by a man who raped 1,200 men and killed dozens and burned things down to the ground every chance he got, and tried to start a war between England and the US, and who was aimed at nothing but mayhem. And he wrote an autobiography at the request of a doctor who had befriended him, and he tells you exactly what he did and why. The individual is the person who pays attention and explores and masters, or who looks away. And the person inhabits an explored territory, and this is unexplored territory. And so wherever you go, there's you and the two halves of you that you have to contend with, and wherever you are with people, there's the society with its tyrannical and beneficial nature, and the society in some sense is that match between what you're doing and what's happening. It's really important to get that right. And then unexplored territory, that's wherever and whenever what you're doing stops working. And so it's not exactly a geographical idea, you know, because when you think of explored territory, you think of geographic landscape, like the domain of an animal, you know, or like your house. And you know, that's definitely an element of it, but you know, if you're in your house and a snake comes into your living room and you're in there, it's like, well, that's an important difference between your house 1 second ago and your house now. And so your house can turn into unexplored territory at the drop of a hat, and that's because we live in space and time. And so the unexplored territory is conceptual. It's a conceptual territory, and it's just wherever you are when things aren't working for you the way they're supposed to be. And so, and these are permanent parts of the human experience, which is why I think they are fundamental characters in our narratives. There's always you, there's some subject of the story, and that subject is an ambivalent person with many different potentials, and you're always somewhere, and it's with other people, because that's our territory, right? I mean, we're social beyond comprehension, and you know, even our primate ancestors, most of their territory was other primates, and their brains and our brains are specialized to view the world as an aggregation of personalities. It's really important to us, and so we tend to view the whole world that way. And then unexplored territory, well, that's where you don't know what to do. But you know, you do know what to do when you don't know what to do, peculiarly enough. it's rather non-specific. It's this generalized stress response, and so what happens is you freeze, roughly speaking, if the threat is enough, then you produce a lot of cortisol and a lot of adrenaline so that you're bloody well ready to move quick in whatever direction you have to, and then maybe you pay more attention, and that's what you do when you don't know what to do. And the problem with that is you can stay in that state forever, man. That's kind of what post-traumatic stress disorder is. It's like you're just like that all the time, and the problem with that is it's very uncomfortable. I mean, you stay like that for any length of time, you're going to get depressed, you're going to develop an anxiety disorder, you're going to get old, because you're burning up resources like mad. You know, your system is shunting everything to maintain that state of emergency preparation, and it's exhausting. It's not where you want to be. So that's partly why people are so prone to defend their territories, their familiar territory, because if their familiar territory is invaded or disrupted, then they default back to this state of emergency preparation, and that's like, that can unglue you if it's profound enough. You know, and you guys know this already. I mean, I think people experience this most particularly when they're betrayed by someone they have an intimate relationship with, you know, when they're lied to. There's other ways, the collapse of a dream or a vision that you've been pursuing, or an illness, or the death in a family. There's lots of other ways, but betrayal is a really good one, because if you're with someone for a long time, you trust them, you have a representation of your past, you have a representation of you in the relationship, you have a representation of them, you have a representation of relationships, you have a representation of the future. You get betrayed, it's like poof, even the past isn't what you thought it was. You know, and what about you? You know, how clueless are you? And maybe not at all, or maybe ultimately gullible, you don't know. Is it your fault? Or, you know, are you so clueless that you just can't protect yourself, or was the person malevolent in some subtle way that you failed to detect? Everything's up in the air. Not good. And this idea that human beings travel to the underworld and come back is like, it's a really useful thing to understand, because we do that all the time. Whenever we fail, it's like whoop, down into the underworld for a while where everything's in chaos, and then maybe we sort ourselves out and bang, we're back up. And so one way of conceptualizing yourself is not as order and as not as chaos, but as the thing that traverses between the two domains. And that, I would say, is the mythological hero.